All right, welcome to the Gold Coast Movie Review. I am your host, Alexander August, and I am joined today by a very special friend, Mr. Paul Fahrenheidt. Paul, thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Mr. August. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on. I don't normally do movie reviews, but for the right one, I'll come on and I'll do it. And this is one of the this one's actually pretty near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, that's what you're telling me. Paul Newman, of course, was a great actor, and this is one of the greatest movies he ever did, Cool Hand Luke. Also, a movie very much rooted in Americana in the 1960s. Um, do you have any just like general thoughts on the movie before we get more into the details of it, or?
Yeah. So the Cool Hand Luke was released around 1967, which is the height. 67, 68 are kind of the height of the Vietnam War. But Paul Newman was one of the biggest left wingers ever, right? He very famously or infamously was offered to play the role of Dirty Harry in Dirty Harry. And he turned it down because he said that the film was too right wing for him, but he recommended a young actor he knew of called Clint Eastwood for the role. Um, and, as a matter of fact, Paul Newman and Clint Eastwood, you could actually kind of like compare them to each other. Clint Eastwood is kind of like the people call him the boomer or the Gen X Ryan Gosling, and it's kind of true. I watch him, I'm like, yeah, he's literally me. Um, but um, but no, yeah. So Cool Hand Luke, it comes out around 1967, and this is right at the culmination of the sort of 60s counterculture, which I think we've actually just started. Which really we've just started to understand. Um, and because the 1968 19 I don't want to this is a movie review. I don't want to go talk about contemporary politics, all right? And I'm trying to keep myself from going into this huge historical autistic reconstruction of the circumstances that led up to the 1968 election. However, this movie is very much a product of its time. And in the
Hmm.
1960s, the sort of the hippie countercultural movement, civil rights, et cetera, this was the first real great challenge to the sort of the people talk a lot about the post-war consensus, and I think a lot of otherwise well-meaning political commentators think that things have been smooth sailing from 1945 onward, but it absolutely has not. No, as a matter of fact, the 1960s really were this period of almost unraveling of this post-war order as as the baby boomers really started coming into their own and the hippies really started taking off. And they're kind of the center of this whole thing. You had the Manson family, you had the Cuban Missile Crisis, you had the assassination of JFK, you had LBJ passing civil rights, Great Society, all this other stuff, and the whole all of this and happening over the course of a decade is really it. In Vietnam starts getting started. This this is really what starts turning up the temperature in the United States, and the culture, the music, the movies, the television, which was these were starting to like these were mediums which had been around for a while, but were really starting to hit their height, because of the massive televisions were getting cheaper and cheaper, and it's almost like every family had one in their house now, and journalists were kind of seen as this like exemplar of virtue or whatever it was. They weren't the farce that they are today. And it much like the how Twitter impacts today, how the printing press impacted the 17th or the 17th century. Television at this time in the 1960s was absolutely revolutionizing how things were done, and were causing significant challenges to the authorities. Um, which actually, you start looking at movies in the 1970s and television shows in the 1970s, the Dukes of Hazzard, White Lightning, and most famously of all, Smokey and the Bandit. These all, you have these, and Cool Hand Luke, and they all kind of have like a rural South kind of depiction. This is about the time period when the rural South, like the Deliverance is, I think, in the 19 Deliverance about this time, yeah. But you really start seeing movies being made in the South. Um, but Cool Hand Luke is also takes place in the rural South. Um, and it's kind of it's drawn up as this like caricature of the man or of authority or of the old way of doing things that the whole civil rights mythos was trying to deconstruct. And so all of that, and Hollywood, which was very much a respected institution at this time, Hollywood was also very much behind this progressive movement, and movies like Cool Hand Luke, that were released around this time really, really, really are an example of it. Same thing with Outlaw Country. I don't mean I've been talking for just about almost 5 minutes now. But even like Outlaw Country, Merle Haggard, Waylon Jennings, these were leftists at the time. They were leftists. They were like, their songs are like, yeah, their songs are cool, but they're advocating for like doing a bunch of drugs and like, cheating on your wife and screw the cops and stuff like that. And we hear that and we're like based, but like actually no, these are very socially harmful behaviors. And this is and but Cool Hand Luke is kind of it's to bring this back and to kind of give it back to you. Cool Hand Luke is very much in this milieu, in this sort of like, challenging traditional authority structures, challenging, the way things are done, and kind of proposing an alternative through, the good-looking anti-hero that's Paul Newman.
Yeah, definitely. It's very obvious that it's an anti-conformist film. And when I'm watching these old movies, it's almost like in the '60s there was this kind of more. It was more of like questioning authority, like why do we have all these rules and regulations, and maybe there could be a better way. And it wasn't until later that that really like crystallized into not even just questioning authority or disregarding it, but like actively hating it. And so I don't know. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in this movie because Boss Godfrey, for example, the man with no eyes, he really does stand in as kind of like this caricature of authority. He's like this cop with these mirrored glasses. He doesn't speak a word. He just carries around this rifle and shoots animals for fun. Just totally sadistic and senseless. And that's kind of like the overall message that we get. That's what prison is. That's what authority is. It's just sadistic and totally senseless.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I mean, that's the thing, right? That I don't know, I don't necessarily know if that's, if and maybe they did probably believe a little bit of it, but this is the way of things. This is just, nothing is new under the sun. Every so often you have, like, prison is one of those traditional authority structures. The police are one of those traditional authority structures. I guess we're doing the same thing, but we're doing it because they're farcical and stupid and communistic and all this other stuff, and like the actual people in charge should be not those things. But like, yeah, like, Smokey and the Bandit portrayed law enforcement as incompetent, stupid, and cowardly. And how one dude can just trick them all, and they can't get him, and he always gets out of the. And these media depictions, like, Dukes of Hazzard, same thing. White Lightning, same thing. Cool Hand Luke, I mean, same thing. Like, it's meant to show the traditional symbols of authority, which prisons, government of any kind, cops, um, you know, freaking what else? The military, all of it
Yeah.
as stupid, idiotic, and founded on very shaky foundations, which may be true to a certain extent, but at the same time, it's like they were tearing it down. I guess their idea to build a better society, but they built a horrific monstrosity because of it.
Yeah, and you really get the feeling that they didn't know exactly what they were going to replace this stuff with. Especially in the '60s, it was all about vibes. Um, like even the ending of this movie. So there's very much a lot of Christ-like imagery
Yeah.
that's associated with Luke in this film.
Oh no, absolutely. That's not accidental either.
Right. But it, in a way, it doesn't really work because, like he dies at the end of the movie, and Dragline is kind of like his apostle now, but they're still in the chain gang. Like, there's never a realistic alternative that's shown. Like Luke in the beginning of the movie, for example, he lands in jail by cutting the heads off of parking meters. And it's hinted that he was like doing this to get revenge at the municipality for doing something to him or whatever. But it's really just like a stupid, senseless crime. This is just a guy who can't follow rules. And as much as I love the character, there's a lot of really admirable things about him. He's like this very masculine figure. Um, he doesn't actually make sense in the real world. He's kind of like a rationalization fantasy.
And that's the thing. Yes, Luke and Paul Newman, very particularly. Paul Newman has a, later on Burt Reynolds. Clint Eastwood was actually kind of a counter revolution. Dirty Harry, the movies in the late 70s, in the late 70s and the 80s, you had a complete shift, like RoboCop, um, the sort of, and that's sort of like the 80s counter revolution where, authority was cool again. All right. And these things seesaw, as you know. But absolutely. And the reason that the old left, or the left around this time, which had control of media and other things like that, were so successful was because they intuitively understood, even if they disagreed with the tools they were using and wanted to destroy them, they understood how to manipulate sex appeal, particularly masculine sex appeal. All right. They were experts at it. Like in the movie, all the authority figures are like old, and like kind of misshapen in some way, or out of shape if they're young, and all the like, what is it? All of their, heroes are like, they're finely chiseled features. They're athletic. They're good looking. They're smart. They're funny. They're quippy. All the, and this is meant to confuse the audience. This is and they understand this. This is meant to make the audience support and like because media creates reality, right? Reality creates media. Media creates reality. It's a feedback loop. And so what was it? So like the authority is portrayed as unflinching, unreasonable, like silly, stupid, like old, decrepit, all these other things. And the anti-authority people, the rebels, are portrayed as like, the same thing in Star Wars, honestly. The rebels are portrayed as like young, quippy, full of life and vigor, and they're all good looking, and they're just like you, and yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Um, and I mean, and the left today, they've kind of ceased to understand this,
Mm-hmm.
which is why they're just so not successful with what they do, and their movies are terrible because they've bought into their own ideology. They believe in their own ideology. They believe that, the world, like that people, in trying to engineer the world, they have engineered themselves. And they believe that they've engineered the world, or that the world wants to see like BIPOC women of color, whatever, disabled, doing cool man stuff. And no one wants to see that. But then you release a movie like The Bike Riders, which is just a bunch of white boys goofing off. Everyone goes to see it. And they've kind of started picking this up a little bit, like with this dude in he was in Top Gun Maverick, and he was in that Twisters movie. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes. I can't remember his name, but I know who
Yeah,
you're talking about.
they've started to pick up on this a little bit. I'm digressing here. We're 16 minutes in, and we haven't actually talked about the plot of the movie or anything like that. But I mean, this is important. It's important, like, because everything is political, right? And like all media needs to be understood in the world that made it.
Mm-hmm.
And Cool Hand Luke, yes, you can kind of enjoy it on the abstract, but you need to kind of understand what messages are contained in this film. What are you programming people to think by showing them this film? Every piece of media is very important. The media that you consume affects you, in a way that you know just the same way the food that you eat affects you. So it's important to kind of understand like the messages, like people talk about subliminal messages. Well, it's not really subliminal messages. It's just there. You look at it, you're like, oh, okay. So anyway, yeah, but yeah, I think we've done a pretty good job kind of extrapolating the background of this movie. You have any other thoughts?
No, I think we've gone over it all. We can go ahead and jump into the plot. Like I mentioned, it begins with him cutting the heads off of parking meters. He's drunk. Luke is, and he is arrested and he is taken to the chain gang. This is a prison in South Florida. Which a funny little fact about the movie, they actually built this, the entire prison and everything was a set that they built in California. And some local building inspector came across the site when they weren't shooting. He thought it was migrant worker housing and he had the place condemned. So they had to work around that. Um, but anyway, Luke, he's brought into the prison, and that's really where the movie begins, is his interactions with the other inmates. Particularly Dragline, who is played masterfully by, let's see if I can remember this guy's name.
George Kennedy.
George Kennedy, that's right. Perfect casting, I think. He just, the physiognomy fits the character so well. And Luke does not really get along from the beginning. And, it's not even that he's trying to be destructive or disruptive. He just refuses to fall into line and to be on the team, really. And that really sets Dragline off. And then, of course, they have this famous fight scene. And
Yeah. So kind of on this to kind of get into this, right? When Luke first shows up at the prison, right? They go over, and so you have to understand, like this movie is an extremely subversive movie. It's a very subversive movie. All right. What was it with
the fight
when
with
Luke
Dragline.
Well, no, even before that, when Luke first shows up to the prison, right? The boss is going over. He looks at Luke's record. He's like, "Oh, you're a war." He initially, they initially call him war hero because he has a silver star or whatever. This is very purposely done. This is meant to make everyone in the audience like, "Oh, this guy is a hero. He's a war hero. He's done and seen horrible things." And oh, this boss, he hasn't seen anything like, I don't know if he's a war hero. He hasn't seen anything that this guy has seen. All right, so it's like the first they make him like, oh, he's a decorated war veteran, and oh, how did he even get to this place? He should be running a company or something. It's meant to make you think, oh, society failed him because he gave everything, and now he's reduced to cutting heads off of parking meters. But even though later in the movie it's like, and that's interesting thing. Later in the movie they ask him, well, why were you doing that? He just says, I don't even know. He was just doing it. He's just cutting heads off of parking meters for no apparent reason. So anyway, there's a bunch of key scenes to this movie, and there's a lot. I mean, this movie is, almost every scene is artistic, but that fight with Dragline, as you say, right? That's when, it's once again, it's building the value of the man. Now, one thing this movie is very effective at is it's actually a pretty good demonstration of how to come into a environment of complete strangers and prove that you are different very quickly. It's a very good demonstration too. I think they start off by calling him fresh meat, whatever, but then he just what is it, like that fight with Dragline? What is it? Every single time he keeps getting knocked down and he keeps getting back up, and he doesn't even swing, or he just wildly swing. Dragline is clearly physically superior, clearly the obvious victor. If there's any referee, Dragline will win every day of the week. But one thing that I actually thought this film, that this particular scene, his fight with Dragline, was really, really interesting to depict was how Will always, in the most apparent way, it shows that almost every problem is a willpower problem. All right. will always triumphs, even over resources, even over money, even over physical superiority. Will triumphs. All right. Luke correctly ascertained that Dragline would not kill him. All right. Could not kill him. And he was willing to keep getting knocked down and beat to a bloody pulp until Dragline basically just gave up because, and he says it, he says, you'll have to kill me, you know? And so eventually Dragline just kind of just gets sick of it. He gets sick of knocking him down and him just getting back up and he just storms out, which is, if you know anything, that you win by default if you do that, you know? Anyway, that kind of plays on into a later scene that we'll probably go over, but that's one of the key things of this is it's like you just can't keep him down. You're this guy, he may not be physically the toughest, but he's got perseverance, and you can just keep knocking him down. So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on that scene.
Yeah, it's certainly one of my favorite scenes in the movie. It's so good, and however political this movie is, I really like the depiction of masculinity and kind of how men work in groups and how you earn respect. Because him and Dragline were not getting along. Dragline was determined to bring him down because he saw him as a threat to his authority over the group. And the outcome of that fight is it actually won him his respect, Dragline's respect, and they did become kind of friends after that. And anyway, I really liked that scene. I thought it was really meaningful.
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah, and that is true. But this is the thing. This is why the movie and the message is so powerful, is exactly because what is it? The best, the most dangerous lies and the most dangerous subversions are not the ones that are like just the all subversion, because that's what we have now. All right. The most dangerous ones are the ones where you have these very true and correct things that with like artistic meaning, but then you intersperse between the lines the crumbs of the lies that and the behavior that you want to see replicated.
Right.
Anyway, we can keep moving.
Yeah. So they do go out and they start working, and we see that Lucas is an extremely hard worker. There's this one excellent scene where they're tarring the road, and he kind of works the group up into a frenzy to tar as quickly as possible, seemingly for no reason at all. And there's this cool scene where everybody's running around. They thought it was going to take them all day, and they end up finishing 2 hours early. And that's kind of how he establishes himself as the leader of the camp. Is he does have this ability to lead the other men and to set an example.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, nothing was it. Actually, I don't know if I want to say this here, but no, yeah, like that. The tarring scene. Yeah, he demonstrates that he's not just like a layabout. That actually he can perform constructive work, and that's just as much for the other inmates as it is for, as you say, as it is for the warden, for the authority figures. It's like, hey, I'm capable, and that's what people look for in a leader. So yes, no, this movie is a very good demonstration of how to go into a group, earn respect, and establish yourself as the leader very quickly.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. But that scene was good. Trying to think if there's anything else. I don't really think I've. But now that you've mentioned that scene, actually, I want to talk about the primary antagonists. All right. Now there's the captain, who's kind of the warden. He has the very famous line, what we have here is a failure to communicate. But then there's also, then there's Walking Boss. If I'm misremembering this, correct me, but there's Walking Boss with the
mirrored glasses.
Yeah, the glasses. Yeah, and those glasses, by the way, this movie is very heavy with symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
All right, there's all sorts of symbolism in this movie. Those glasses that Walking Boss is wearing are like these like aviators that are so reflective that you can't see into them. It's just a mirror back onto you. That's that is meant to represent how authority, you like, was it like, there's, authority has this sort of inhuman sense. Like Walking Boss isn't so much a man, he's a robot. He has no lines in the entire movie.
Mm-hmm.
He just shoots things, right? And it's meant to show you, it's like, you know, hey, look, authority, it doesn't even listen to you. It isn't even, it's not even human. It's dehumanizing authority. Um as opposed to, later movies that like Dirty Harry, where authority is very human and very much always on the knife's edge. Anyway, but yeah, no, like, and for all of these scenes, whenever they're out in the, scenes in this movie usually take place, they're either at the prison itself or they're out working. Those are the two places in this movie usually where scenes take place. Um, and like it's and it kind of imbues, and you almost feel like you're a prisoner with them watching this movie. The routine, the movie almost establishes the routine that these guys go through that you do. It shows them when they wake up. It shows them when they go to work. It shows them when they come back and they have leisure time. It shows them when they're going to bed. It shows them on holidays. It shows them on regular days. This is, you're very much like with them. You're experiencing life with them. Nothing exists much for you the same way as it is for them. Nothing exists outside of this prison and its routines.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I also think Dragline in this movie, he's not really an antagonist, but he's a very interesting character because I think he's meant to be symbolic of people who still have this trust and authority. And so he's kind of this character of what Aristotle might call the natural slave. He has this kind of, he's all about all these little rules and regulations. And even at the very end of the movie, when it's obvious they can't go back to how things were, all he wants is to go back and, for them to have the same bunks and just for, prison life to go on like normal.
Yeah.
And, so of course this is like this country boy with this thick accent. He's portrayed as kind of this simple guy. And, I don't know. I thought that was a very interesting character and kind of a counter to Luke, even if he's not an antagonist.
No, that's true. I mean, and yeah, even at the end, it's kind of like he kind of breaks at the end. But we're kind of, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves with that.
Yes. There is this famous scene of the woman cleaning the car while the prisoners watch, which is like the one moment in the movie where we see something outside of the prison. And of course, it's driving these guys crazy. They had a rule on set that no wives were allowed because they wanted to separate all the men on set from seeing any women in real life before they filmed that scene.
Yeah.
We do have the scene where Luke's mom comes to visit. Really sad scene. It helps kind of hammer down that image of Luke as this guy he's been totally failed by society, even his own family. There's nothing left for him anymore.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, they're constantly, this is the thing. This is the subversion. You are humanizing Luke as much as possible. You are making people sympathize with him as much as possible. And the whole message, the subliminal message, is always just, see, if you were in his position, you would do nothing different. See, this is why we should let in infinity immigrant. But this is logically how it goes, right? It's like, see, like, see how much he got failed. See how his family fails him. See how this, that, whatever. It's like, but humanize him. He is the only one who is shown to be a real person. The other prisoners kind of the same way because they talk about their families. There's what I'm trying to remember what the rich guy is called, from Connecticut.
The con artist.
Yeah, the con artist. Yeah, the guy who got booked for passing fake checks. Yeah, he talks like he has a life outside of here. The prisoners are given character. They're real people. Mm-hmm. The bosses are not. The bosses are all like, you never see them talking. The only thing they're ever doing is killing or giving commands,
Right.
They are made as distant from you as possible. Um, yeah, no, like I don't mean to sound like a broken record here, but this is exactly like what is happening. And have we gotten to the egg scene yet?
No, we haven't. I just to talk about your last point. I think the only instance we see of kind of any trace of human in the prison guards is when they're placing Luke in the box because his mom died, and they say that they're frightened he'll run away. And he tells that guard, or the guard tells him, I'm sorry that I have to do this. I'm just doing my job. And Luke says, well, just because it's your job doesn't make it right. And the guy looks kind of sheepish, and then he shuts him in there. And that's the only instance that we have a guard that shows any kind of conscience or humanity in the entire film.
Yeah, no, you're right that that's the case, but what is it? You're right that that's the case, but even in that instance, right, he is depicted as yes, it's humanizing, but at the same time, the guard is depicted as this weak slave to authority.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one who knows that this isn't right, but he just chooses to go with it anyway. And this is how you get into like this Nuremberg BS that gets purported. Shouldn't curse, but no, yeah, no, that's exactly the same thing. Is it's like authority. Even the people in authority. When it comes down to it, they will side with power over 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 any actual semblance of being you know being forgiving or forbearing to your fellow man. So yeah, no, that's so yes, they are. That is, and that's the thing that further reinforces the message that these are weak people. Not only are these evil, bad, inflexible, etc. people, but they're also weak. And someone like Luke can come along and just run circles around them. And that's why the decade following this film was as bad as it was, because this was the message that was getting blasted in all of these movies.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess we would come to the egg scene next. Very famous scene from this movie, where Luke takes this bet to eat 50 boiled eggs, and they've got pretty much all the money in camp riding on this bet. There's this one shot that really surprised me. For the most part, this isn't like a great looking film. It's not like on the cutting edge of cinematography. It's very gritty and real feeling. But there's this one shot where he's kind of rocking up and down, eating these eggs, and the camera is moving with him, which I hadn't really seen anything else like that in the movie. I thought that was pretty innovative.
Yeah. I think I'm remembering the shot that you're talking about. And yeah, I think that one stuck out to me as well. Is it's like, oh, this is an interesting thing of filmography. Yeah, and this is the thing, like I have this director, friggin' Rosenberg, he clearly knows what he's doing. He clearly understands how to make a piece of art, because obviously we're sitting here talking about it now for what, like almost 60 years later. So but yeah, so like no, and the skill of the directors is not to be underplayed. It's the motives. But no, yeah, no, I think that was a and also on this scene, this egg scene is kind of the key thing of the whole movie, because it's this almost superhuman feat, all right, that no one believes is possible. It's almost portrayed as like this miracle of human will, of like, oh, Luke was able to eat 50 eggs, without yakking. And at the end, he very obviously he's splayed out, he's stripped down to his underwear, and he's finally eats the last one. He's splayed out on the table with his arms outstretched and his legs crossed, and everyone else has gone away celebrating. He's just splayed out on this table in this very obvious, reference to Christ's crucifixion. It was so obvious. I saw it when I was watching the movie for the first time. Yeah.
Yeah, that was not subtle at all. There's also quite a bit of cross imagery. Even the ending of the movie, ends on a cross with the roads. But I don't know. It kind of goes back to the contradiction of Luke's character. because throughout the movie we've seen up until this time, like his mom even tells him, "You always had good jobs. You're a war hero. This is a guy who's a hard worker. He knows how to earn the respect of other men. He has a very strong willpower. He'll do anything he sets his mind to, but he just can't help but end up in prison and end up in a system that endlessly abuses him simply because he exists." And that's really, I don't know, that's the crux of the movie, and that's kind of where it fails, because this character ultimately doesn't make sense. Like a guy who was actually of Luke's, possessed his work ethic and his will and his experience, would not be languishing away in a South Florida jail chain gang.
Yeah. No, it's true. Um, and I mean, and like kind of this imagery, he's depicted as this multiple times. He's depicted as this very obvious allegories to Christ. Oh, like Jesus Christ was a misfit, was an outcast, was failed by society. Was treated terribly by the authorities, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and this is the idea. This era really, because everything was kind of turned on its head, including the Christian faith, and we still deal with the consequences today. But this idea of like the anarchist hippie Jesus, at
Right.
least its modern iteration, it comes from this period, because they take like this, because they don't actually believe in the story. They just know the story and know it's something that society has in their canon. And so they take it and they're like, oh, well, Jesus is this, this, and this. And you want to be like Jesus, don't you? Well, Jesus, like, was mistreated by authority and all this other stuff. Um, yeah, no, there is a lot of cross imagery in this movie. And, even when they're singing Plastic Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, anyway, I mean, so yeah, I mean, yeah, no, the egg scene is really, did we skip, or I don't, did the gambling scene come after the egg scene or before the egg scene?
That came before the egg scene,
Okay.
but we can
So
talk about that.
we skipped one of the most important scenes.
Yeah.
We skipped the scene where they said the movie, or like anyway, but yeah, the egg scene, or not the egg scene, the gambling scene, right? Um what is it? Luke is playing in poker. I think he's playing against the con artist, the New England rich guy,
Yeah.
who's got like, I don't remember what he had, but he had a good poker hand. They're playing poker. And Luke has nothing, but he's got the best poker face, the best, and he bluffs almost perfectly. And once again, this is showing Will. This is another thing in the movie. Will always triumphs. Will always triumphs. Um, and Luke, they're playing, and then Luke throws down his hand, and he has, nothing in it. And the dude says, I forget what he says, but it's like, I don't know how you did that or whatever. And then Luke delivers probably the coldest line of the entire movie. He says, "Sometimes nothing can beat a real cool hand."
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, and it's just like much as I like, I look at this movie and you know I know what it is. I'm like, this is why it's so effective, just because of like how cold that line is, man. Sometimes nothing can beat a real cool hand. I'm like, man. And they hear that, like, and even the movie they treat it as like a cold line. And like, matter of fact, that's when Dragline says, that's it, you're Cool Hand Luke. He gives him his nickname. He's like, because you beat him with nothing, just like you came at me with nothing. You know, um, and it kind of, that nothing is a big theme of this movie as well. Though, like the idea of nothing, um, and because it's very much got this anarchist sensibility. What does anarchy mean? Without foundation. You know, um, unfounded. It's like, power isn't founded on anything, and anyone else can come along with nothing and put it along to replace it. Um, yeah. So anyway, Um, trying to think. Yeah, no, that's and then of course you have the very, he's given his name. They call him Cool Hand Luke or whatever. Um, and then yeah, and then they have the egg scene, and the egg scene just is like, it's like the sort of the peak of the movie. It's like Luke is unequivocally the hero, and even the guards recognize it, and you know, um, and then I think we get to the point where he tries to run away, or he.
Yes, yes, he makes several attempts.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, on I believe, is it the first one or the second one where he sends them the photo while he's
Is
missing?
That's the second one. The first one he gets, I think, put into the box.
That's right.
They catch him and they put him in the box.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. So he makes the first attempt to escape. This, rural South prison. The only people who live nearby are like there's literally, this is why, and even to this day, this is why there's a lot of prisons in the very very rural South, is because there's nothing nearby. There's no development, there's no infrastructure, there's like one highway. So there's only so many places that these people can go, right? It's actually a lot harder. You may think like, oh, you escape from prison, oh, you've got all this surrounding countryside. It's like, well, no, actually, the people in that prison know that countryside a lot better than you do.
hmm
And there's only so many places you can go, and like you can't follow the main road because they're gonna have patrols there. And like, oh, you can't go into a homestead because they got a phone to the prison, or and you can't go into the woods, and you can't walk and find a city because well, where's the nearest town? It's like freaking 40 miles away, 50 miles away. So yeah, so yeah, and that's kind of depicted in the movie with his various escape attempts. There's nothing around the prison. There's just nothing. Like, and that's another big key theme in the movie, is like there's nothing outside this little world they're in.
yeah, yep. It is. It is very bleak. And then of course his third escape is his final attempt, and that's where they end up in the church. And Luke has a strange relationship where he seems to kind of believe in God, but he addresses him, as the old man in the sky. There's a scene where he walks out into the rain and he's like shaking his fist and daring God to do something.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about how they portrayed his spiritual status in this film?
No, absolutely. I mean, he's portrayed as this Christ-like figure. That's what he's portrayed as, but it's actually not at all. It's like this this cultural Christ.
Right.
Like remaking. It's like what it says in First Romans. It's like making God in the image of what like man. They're making Christ into, like with Luke. Luke is the Christ that they want. Oh, he's this. He's treated so unfairly, and his society has failed him, and his punishments are totally disproportional from these like silly authorities. Like, no, he's very much portrayed as this like spiritual, and almost it's almost like, as like, even kind of at the end, we've talked about the end, we're going to get to the end, but like even at the end, it's almost like it's at the whole point is it's portrayed as like, as God has failed him too. Everyone
Yeah.
has failed him. It's like, it's not, and this is the key thing, it's not his fault. And this is the whole idea of rehabilitative justice, of socioeconomic factors, of all these other things that got put out. It is like, it just basically, it's the sapping of any agency in the world, is that it's like nothing is anyone's fault. With this figure of Luke. All right. But no, absolutely. No, yeah, he's honestly, like, of course he's portrayed almost as a God hater, you
Yeah.
know. It's not that he doesn't even, I mean, what does he say? I remember, there was a scene when he was talking about what he believed, and it's like he was daring God, he was tempting God, he was
hmm
but I don't know if he said that there was nothing after that, that there's nothing up there. I have the feeling he did, but I don't know. You may know better than I do.
Yeah, I don't believe that he did. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. And in the final scene, when he's in the church, he's sitting there, basically just listing off all the ways that God has failed him, and just saying, "Wow, you really dealt me a bum hand in life."
Yeah. I promise. I promise. And I don't want to. we can get to that point. But like, yeah, I mean, his first escape he's caught, but his second escape, he somehow manages it. He somehow manages that he's gotten out. And he goes somewhere else and he's working this job and he sends a photo back to the prison of him with like two women at like this bar, like he's living the high life, you
Mhm.
know. And everyone is, it's like, it's like it becomes this symbol of like, no, there is a world outside here, and Luke is the proof. Luke is the symbol. Luke is living it. But then he comes back. And you know, and what is it? Then he comes back and he tells the prisoner, he's like, look, there was just nothing out there. I just, I hated. He's like, I hated bosses. I hated all authority. I hated, if I remember, I'm not saying the line exactly right, but you know, that's the whole thing he's talking about there. And once again, this is a whole, like, this movie is bosses and authority are stupid and have no purpose. And so he's like, well, I might as well just come back here. Um, and then he comes back and they give him and they put shackles on his feet. Um, and I don't know what kind of kicks off the final act. Do you remember what kicks off the final act of the movie?
Yeah, so after he returns after his second escape, that's where we get the scene where he comes in after a long day of work, and they tell him, "Oh, your dirt is in Boss Keen's ditch." Right? So he's digging out this meaningless corner of the yard all night, and they come back and they say, "Oh, why is that dirt on my yard?" And they make him fill it back in, then they make him make him dig it out again. And that's the scene where we see Luke start to break, where he starts begging and pleading, "Please don't hit me anymore. I'll do anything. I've got my mind right." And, we see all his fellow prisoners watching from inside the prison house. And it's like this horrible, tragic scene where Luke, who's been this leader, he's been this like figure of masculinity, is now on his knees in the mud, crying and begging for mercy.
Yeah. No, yeah, and I mean, and that's the thing, it's I don't know. I've kind of been taking this polemic with the movie. I don't know how that fits into the whole anti-authority thing. I guess it's.
I think it's just more proof of the total sadism and the senselessness of the authority.
Yeah.
There's no reason. The only reason they're having him work all night is just to punish him, just
Yeah.
because they resent him and they hate him for who he is.
No, that's fair. Yeah, and I mean, and I guess, and once again, I guess it's to humanize him. It's to be like, oh wow, yeah, no, even he could be broken. And it's like, oh, and so can you, so can anyone. And yeah, he kind of becomes this, and then as soon as that happens, he kind of becomes this, he becomes one of the prisoners who's like the lackeys, the lapdogs.
Yeah,
Um,
he's
and
fetching the rifle for them, and yeah,
yeah, and everyone kind of, all the prisoners think like, oh, he betrayed us, da, 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 start spitting at him, until we get into the final scene of the movie where he, what is it? Was it they tell him, oh, we can go back to the truck and cut it up for our supper or whatever, for our lunch, and and then he just steals the truck.
yeah,
And Dragline jumps over and jumps on the truck with him. And Luke is like, and he's like, I thought you were broken. He said, I was. Um, but this is the sort of the final sort of set of circumstances for the movie. Him and Dragline, they steal this truck, but they can't get very far with it, so they ditch it and they're in the woods, and it's like the whole, like, the police department, the warden, everyone is looking for them. And they're trying to see if they can outrun them, but they both kind of feel like, oh well, it's better we split up. So they split up, and Luke goes to this, as you were talking about, this church, right? He goes to this church, and it's an abandoned church, and it's decrepit, and he goes in, and he starts talking to God. This is like the final, like, yeah, you are right. He is, yeah, as you said earlier, he starts listing off all the ways God failed him. He's like, well, you didn't, he's like, hey, I know I haven't been, and this is such a human thing to do. It's like, oh, hey, I haven't been, you know, talking to you a lot. I haven't been respectful for you, but you haven't given me anything either. It's like, and yeah, no, and that's the thing. Like, and the lack of response, and this is meant to be, symbolic of Christ's conversation with God in the Garden of Gethsemane. I don't know how to pronounce it, but you know, but that, unlike this conversation, that conversation is Christ in complete submission and obedience to God, in complete, you know, like, um, he's showing God all of his fears, all of his doubts, all this other thing. But he's like, but never, if it's possible for this cup to pass to someone else, please do so. But nevertheless, let your will and not mine be done.
Right.
And a lot of people misread that. It's like, well, no, like that's Christ basically, as the example of all humans, admitting his faults to God, admitting his fear and his whatever, but then following that up with obedience. It's like, but nevertheless, let your will, not mine, be done. And Luke, like in this situation, Luke is putting all the blame on God. He's blaming God for where he is, and God's silence at the end is almost like the director basically pointing the finger and being like, this is God's failure too. God failed Luke. And yeah, and they, all the anyway, yeah, and then there's like the final scene of the movie after Luke finishes up the conversation with God.
Yes, and this is where he goes to the window and he repeats the famous line, "It looks like we have a failure to communicate."
Well, before that, right? It's was it Dragline has been caught by them, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Dragline's been
And
caught by them, and then they send him into the church. All right. And he's like, as you said earlier, he's like, hey, he just wants things to go back to normal. He likes the world that he lived in, and he wants Luke to be back, etc. But he's like, hey, they've promised that they're not going to treat you too badly, etc., etc. Just come on out, and everything will be good. And he, and that's when he goes to the window.
yes. Yeah, and we do have Dragline coming in there as the Judas figure very explicitly.
Yeah.
Thinking that he had cut some kind of deal with the authorities. And again, he's portrayed as this very simple kind of stupid character, that he really believes they'll get their bunks back. They just have to obey the law. And then of course we have Paul. He doesn't buy it, or Luke, excuse me. He goes to the window. He repeats the line. And the man with no eyes, with the mirrored glasses, shoots him just like he shot the animals throughout the rest of the movie, just totally without hesitation or without reason.
Yeah, and that's the end of the movie, right? Authority, that's the final message. God was silent, God failed him, and authority will just kill you they'll kill you. They'll just straight kill you without even thinking about it. They'll lie, they'll cheat, they'll make false deals. Because that's what it meant. That's what it was meant to do. It was a false deal to see if they could get Luke into eye shot, and into gunshot range. And yeah, and he gets killed. But then when Dragline is coming back out, he kind of breaks free and starts manhandling the walking boss, the man with no eyes, and kind of tackles him to the ground and tries to kill him, but they pull him off. But symbolically, the sort of the movie is shown with the wheels crushing the mirrored glasses, which is kind of meant to show that it's now Dragline will never trust authority again, and authority has been symbolically, even though it's like with Christ. Like, this is the thing; these people, it's Christ with no resurrection. Luke has died. Christ died, but symbolically he's risen again with the destruction of authority. And that's the thing. Like symbolically, Luke died so that the glasses are crushed by the tires, and now the warden is forever challenged, and and all that.
Yes. And then we have the very final scene of the movie, which is Dragline. He's back with the chain gang working on the road, and he's telling them about Luke. he's basically like an apostle preaching this anti-conformist gospel. And the camera goes up, and we see that the road forms a cross, and then it cuts to credits. But it really is this very hollow metaphor. Uh, all of the Christian stuff they try to put in this movie, because I mean, ultimately, what did Luke accomplish? Like nothing. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, that's
Dragline is
exactly
still on
it.
the chain gang. I mean, they're talking about all this stuff, but it just seems very hollow. Kind of ends on a flat note, I think.
Yeah. No, no, that's exactly it. Like nothing. That's one of the recurring themes. Nothing. Yeah, Luke ends up accomplishing nothing. Everything is as it was beforehand. It's just now it's like the new normal. It's like, but none of them have actually left prison. None of them are, and it's all in the same, you know. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a good movie. It's an artistically sophisticated movie, and Luke is an interesting character. Um, However, what was it? Like I'm reminded of Milton Satan. All right, when I look at this and it's like, oh, you have this wonderful, amazing, glittering image with who's so interesting and he's gone through so much struggle and he's just yearned so hard and everything else. And all of it was meaningless.
Yeah,
None of it meant anything. It was all worthless. It doesn't matter. Interesting artistic sophistication is meaningless, is worthless. And this is without being properly founded on something.
mm,
And this is when I start getting into like my actual religious message. But like the only thing that anything can be founded on and have it make sense is God,
yeah,
is Jesus Christ very specifically, but is God. You know, that is the only way that you can make anything make sense. And this movie, it's very moving. It's very, you really do sympathize for Luke and you see the struggle and the trial and the tribulation, but at the end of the day, it's just like you're left at the end of the movie like, well, what was the whole point of that? What was the point of all of that? Like even when I watched it the first time, I'm like, what was the point of all of that? You know? Um I don't know. I didn't get like infuriated. I didn't get like violently angry at the end of that movie like I did when I watched Chinatown. But like no, when I finished up Chinatown, I wanted to kill someone because of
yeah.
how infuriated I was by the end of that movie. And how much I hated Roman Polanski. But Cool Hand Luke, I just you know, I just I'm just like, okay, well that was nice, but what was the whole point? That's what I came away with it.
Yeah, I feel a very similar way. I still like the movie a lot, and I think there are a few things we talked about, like the group dynamics. The message of will triumphing over all. Um, Kind of Luke's stoicism. There's a lot of really good and interesting things in this movie, but on the whole, it really falls flat because again, it is kind of from this like very idealistic and sophisticated era of progressive politics where I don't even think they meant for the ending to be that nihilistic or hollow. I think they were genuinely trying to portray like an uplifting and like moving moment, with this kind of montage of Luke and then him being talked about like he was a Christ figure. It simply doesn't work because they don't really understand the religious mythos that they're trying to appropriate.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's exactly it. And I mean, yeah, they didn't mean to. They didn't mean to have the ending be meaningless, but the ending is meaningless
Yeah,
nonetheless. And that's kind of the only thing. You know, the only thing you can get from nothing is nothing. All right. And when you have no authority, when you have no no hierarchy, when you have no meaning, no set of values, you have nothing, you know, that's that's the only thing. Nothing can only come from nothing, or you cannot have something come from nothing, and you cannot have nothing come from something. All right, those are two diametrically opposed concepts. Um, and even nothing isn't so much a concept as much as it is the negation of something. You know, nothing just is a placeholder. It just refers to the absence of a thing. But in reality, even if you point to like air, there's still like oxygen particles in the air or whatever that's there, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, but nothing is just a concept. It's just is or like I said, is this lack of a concept. And no, that's precisely it. Like when you have a movie whose whole message is let's tear down authority, but then like have the final sort of symbolic act be like killing the thing that tears down the authority. Okay, well now you have nothing.
Yeah.
You've torn down authority and you've destroyed the tool that you used to tear down the authority. So now what is there? You know, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. There's not really a way to come to a satisfying conclusion with how the movie was set up, and so it does end on kind of a disappointing note. But overall, I like it. I think it's a very important movie to understand the history of America, and especially where people were at, or where the media was trying to get people to during the late '60s. Um, there's just so much propaganda in this movie that is really well done, and that's why it's still relevant today.
Yeah. No, very much so. Very much so. And it really was it really is kind of a seminal movie of its time. It really is kind of like if you wanted to see where like the hardest core leftist kind of thing in the 1960s was, this movie is a good movie to understand that. Because at least Smokey and the Bandit had a little bit of that like old school Southern kind of like, yeah, there's resistance to authority, but like, it's done, in a very American way that it's done. There was something there. Here it's just I don't even you don't know where Luke's from. You don't know like what his background is. You see his family, but you get an idea of his past, but you don't know where he fought or what he did and anything. It's just kind of empty. I don't know. Yeah, it's like I said, it's really moving. It's a really moving movie. It's a really like artistically profound movie, but you're left at the end of it just, what was the point? What was the whole point of it? It's like you're taken through this emotional roller coaster, and then there's no there's no resolution. There's no ending. It's just functionally reset with a slightly new set of things that get talked about within this world.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It certainly feels like the precursor to nihilism, kind of like a nihilistic attitude that still thinks it's idealistic, and just hasn't realized it yet.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, any final thoughts before we end here?
I mean, I've kind of been giving my thoughts on the movie the whole time. I'll kind of just tie it all up in a nice little bow and just be like, look, this movie is absolutely an anti-authority movie, is very much um done and made by leftists with a leftist message. And you know, Paul Newman is a great actor. The director, Rosenberg, clearly knows what he's doing. This movie made George Kennedy's career. And it's you know it's and it does have those aspects of it. It's like it is a very very interesting lesson in influence building, in where authority comes from, like what people recognize as legitimate sources of authority, and how to tear down those sources of authority. Like the movie is good in its treatment of authority. However, it has no real animating principle. There's no goal it's trying to get to other than just to simply tear down all that it demonstrates. So, um, so yeah, I mean, if you've listened to this, in lieu of watching the movie, first of all, what are you doing? Second of all, I mean, now there's no real point in watching the movie, but I guess you can watch it because it's different watching it than hearing about it. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is one of those movies. It's like, if you watch it paying attention, you kind of get it. It's not a movie I don't think I would show to my wife or my kids. Much as it does have a place of emotional closeness to me. Um, you know, it's not a movie I would want to see continued.
Yeah, yeah, I certainly agree with all that. Yeah, and if anybody listening has not seen this movie, definitely go and watch it for yourself, because there is quite a bit of different stuff going on inside of it, and I do think it's worth watching if you're interested in American cinema. It's one of those that you really have to see for yourself.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Thank you so much, Paul, for coming on. It was a pleasure, and maybe we'll see you again one of these days.
No, I hope so. I hope so. Thank you for having me on.
Very much. You have a great one.
You as well. Thank you.